Every culture, every civilization has its myths and monsters. Some are woven into their religion, like the Viransusi of the Sami people of Finland, the story of Texcatlipoca, who turned into a jaguar in Aztec mythology, and other such creatures shared with Maya and Toltec cultures of Mesoamerica. Then there are the Droberg, the Jormungandr, and the Fenrir of Norse mythology in Scandinavia, and the rock apes with different names in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand. We cannot forget the Yeti, or abominable snowman of Tibet, who, according to legend, lives in the Himalayas. However, just as some Native Americans in the United States also have within their folklore the stories of the Sasquatch, better known as Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and other spirits, the Cajuns of the bayous in Louisiana have their own creatures of legend. One in particular is the Rougarou. What is the Rugaroo, also known as the Loup-garou? Where did it come from, and did it become involved in the War of 1812?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former soldier, Marine Corps scout sniper, history professor, historian and book author, and we will answer these questions and other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
The origins of the Rougarou lie in medieval French folklore, the first written accounts coming in the 16th century. During that time in France, the Rougarou was called the Loup-garou. Loup is French for wolf, and garou refers to a man that transforms into an animal. According to folklore, the monster is said to inhabit the swamps and sugarcane fields around Acadiana, Lake Pontchartrain, and the greater New Orleans regions. Often the story of the Rougarou has been used to instill fear in the hearts of Cajun children as a way to command obedience and correct their behavior. As the story goes, the half-man, half-wolf monster targets and kills Catholics that have failed to follow the rules of Lent. It was also preached that French Catholics that broke the Lent 7 years in a row would be hunted down and killed by the beast. The tales of the Rougarou describe it as being a large beast standing up to 10 feet tall, with the body of a human covered with thick hair and the head of a wolf, or in some cases a large dog, usually dark in color, but also often with pale white fur, and with very prominent fangs, claws, and red eyes that are said to glow brightly. Other versions say it is a more decidedly ghostly or spectral apparition, which glows in the night, which can disappear at will. The mysterious beast is said to be able to change its shape, or shapeshift, and it can even take on other forms, such as that of a were-pig, were-cattle, or even were-cranes. In these times, many crimes were blamed on the beast, ranging from theft to the kidnapping of children. There was a significant belief in the beast by the people, and people were even put on trial, much like the witch hunts of Europe and colonial America, and found guilty of being the fabled beast. There is even the story of a man who was charged with murder, but he claimed to be a Rougarou. Due to this condition not being of his own making, he was acquitted of the murder charge, but was still beheaded for being a Rougarou. As the French and Canadian settlers migrated, they also brought their faith along with their superstitions, including the legend of the beast to Louisiana. It was eventually through the Cajun French that the name Rougarou came to be. The Cajuns, also known as Acadians, are a unique ethnic group that makes up a significant portion of southern Louisiana's population. According to folklore, a Rougarou is a human beast that has been placed under a spell, or a curse that is not easy to break. This also has a connection to the religion of voodoo, which brings us the legends of zombies. A Rougarou has the opportunity to change back to a human after 101 days, but only after finding another compliant human who is willing to have the curse transferred to them. The former Rougarou is then freed from the curse and allowed to take human form permanently. Yes, good luck with that one. Another way this can be done is by the Rougarou either attacking someone or, in other versions, simply gazing into a person's eyes. In the past, it was not uncommon for people to look upon strangers or particularly odd, unusual people with great suspicion, as it was thought that they may be one of the feared beasts. However, according to another account, there really is no escape from the curse. Once the human is cursed, some believe it is permanent. The Rougarou forever lives a life of shape-shifting into its beast form every night. then being forced to transform back to a human at sunrise. This is a similar condition to that of the traditional werewolf. However, unlike a werewolf, during the day, the Rugaroo appears weak, sickly, and vulnerable. Unlike the werewolf, silver bullets will not kill it. Being a supernatural beast that has superhuman strength, speed, and sharp claws and teeth, it is a formidable monster. However, just like its cousin the werewolf, the Rugaroo has its weakness. Some legends say that the beast can only be killed by fire or, like a vampire, decapitation. No, a wooden stake through the heart will not work, while others say it can be killed while it's in its vulnerable human form. But the Rugaroo also has its supporters, as it is believed that Catholics in good standing, who are pious and generous, will have the creature's protection. The creature also, according to some variations, protects its people against others who would present a danger, like the Virensusi of Finland. On that note, one story that has no verifiability, but is still interesting nonetheless, was that when British forces attacked New Orleans during the War of 1812, this was when Major General Edward Pakenham decided to attack the city, and he sent several units on reconnaissance patrols. On January 8, 1815, the attack was ordered, and 2 units, the Highlanders of the 93rd and 95th Regiments of Foot, followed their orders. The 93rd skirted the river supporting the 95th. Part of the plan was a night assault to take hundreds of men in small boats through a canal that had been dug, allowing the British to cross the river, outflanking American Major General Andrew Jackson's forces. Despite the British having numerical superiority, the attack was a failure. The American and Indian defenders harassed the British along the way. Many of the small boats sank, and the final assault the next day was repulsed. The number of British losses in the casualty reports are 291 killed, 1,262 wounded, and 484 missing, a total loss of 2,087 men, attacking a city in a war that was already over. The Treaty of Ghent ending the conflict had been signed on December 24, 1814 in Ghent, Belgium. What is interesting is that the story of the 484 missing men who were never found were, for the most part, preyed upon by the Rougarou, or in some cases helped by the Paramalfay, a swamp creature that also lives in the bayous. It was said that some of the mercenaries, under the command of Cajun pirate Jean Lafitte, supporting Jackson, would not venture into the bayous at night, waiting until daylight to collect weapons and gear from the dead enemy out of fear of the Rougarou and other creatures. We know how to protect ourselves against vampires, but what about the Rougarou? For protection, legend says to place 13 identical coins, such as pennies or dimes, at all entrances to your dwelling. When the Rougarou comes across the coins, it will begin to count them, as it is a very curious creature. However, due to its incredibly poor math skills, the beast can only count to 12. As it gets to 13, it becomes very confused. It will then recount the pennies over and over, continuously. The creature will be totally perplexed and transfixed as it encounters the number 13, until sunrise, when the Rugaroo is forced to retreat as its human form begins to resurface, at which time it is mortal and can be killed. A simple yet effective trick to protect oneself from the beast. The Rougarou is an important element in Cajun legends, just like the Grunch, a type of gremlin or goblin, and of course the Paramalfay. You can see renditions of the Rougarou on t-shirts, mugs, in theme parks, and even roller coasters are named after it. The Rougarou Festival at Cedar Point, Louisiana is a prime example of the Rougarou's cultural popularity. Every year in October, the Rougarou Fest is held in downtown Houma. Cajun children know about the Rougarou, the Paramalfay, and other creatures all too well. And perhaps that is why they are so well behaved.
He looks up when he sees something coming down through the tall grass. Of course, this kid is panicked. He takes off. You can see its hand hanging by the window.
In July of 1988, a routine day for reporter Jan Easterling became the spark that lit one of South Carolina's most chilling legends. What she uncovered wasn't just a tale of a creature, but the birth of a phenomenon that would haunt the Scape Ore Swamp forever. Jan Easterling, newspaper reporter, began began her day on July 18th, 1988, the way she did most days, checking with the Lee County Sheriff's Department. Easterling was tasked with covering everything that happened in the 3 mostly rural counties east of Columbia, South Carolina. She wrote about crime, the courts, the local economy, and whatever else she found interesting. But July 18th would be a day she never forgot, after speaking with Lee County Sheriff Liston Truesdale. He told her how days earlier, a few miles outside of Bishopville, South Carolina, a couple awoke to find their Ford LTD badly scratched. The hood ornament was broken, the chrome was chewed up, and the car's wiring was ripped out. The sheriff was headed to the scene, a house on a sandy dead end off a 2-lane county road. He asked her if she would like to come along. Of course, she agreed. What she saw next would become an uncanny story of legend in South Carolina's folklore forever. So what did she see? What terrorized the swamps of Skateboard? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Something else. When the big man was killed, you must have wanted it. Its blood was on the leaves.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
Over the course of that Monday, she met the couple with the damaged car and a deputy who had interviewed 2 men chased by a creature from a nearby swamp. She also talked with a teenager who would become an instant celebrity after she included a quote from him about seeing a red-eyed monster with skin like a lizard. Easterling had no way of knowing what would happen next, that the story would capture the world's curiosity, and Bishopville would join a select group of places known for spawning monsters that haunt imaginations beyond their borders. Lee County's Lizardman would enter the ranks of Bigfoot, the Mothman, and the Chupacabra of Puerto Rico. Bishopville, a town of about 3,600 men, and even fewer today, would come to see its monsters as a means to economic revival. Lizardman's ascension from rumor to legend began when Easterling's paper, The State, put the story on its Tuesday's front page with the enticing headline, "Lizardman Lurking in Lee County Swamp." That day, a radio station in Columbia read the story on air and offered an eye-popping reward of $1 million for the creature's capture. Bishopville is usually only a waypoint from travelers between Columbia and Florence on Interstate 20. But in an instant, it became a destination. The story ran on Tuesday, and people grabbed their campers and tents and headed that way, Easterling said. By the time the weekly Lee County Observer went to press on Wednesday, its writers remarked on the town's sudden statewide notoriety. And they fretted about all the people wandering through the woods late at night with flashlights and guns. And the legend of the Lizardman wasn't yet 2 days old. That first Monday in July 1988, Christopher Davis was a quiet 17-year-old on the high school basketball team, and he told Easterling a harrowing story. He described how he had a flat tire driving home from a night shift at McDonald's, and how, as he was putting the jack back in his trunk, he saw a 7-foot-tall creature with scaly red skin and red eyes running towards him. He told her how it caught up with him as he sped away and made a thud as it landed on his roof. He described seeing its 3-fingered claws on his windshield until he finally swerved enough to throw the thing off. Within days, Davis was repeating the story to radio hosts and tourists who gawked at his damaged car. It didn't take long before it became a caricature on roadside merchandise. In a matter of days, Easterling remembers, Lizardman t-shirts were flying like flags in the wind. A week after its first report on the creature, the Sports World store in Bishopville was selling Lee County Lizard Patrol shirts and hats. After another week, a front-page headline declared, "Lizard business booming in county."
Sensing an opportunity, entrepreneurs started hawking lizard juice, which was lemonade dyed green, and lizard eggs, which were watermelons. Several vendors set up on the side of Browntown Road, a 2-lane highway southwest of Bishopville. Then the road sinks down a hill into a dense, lush thicket of mucky woods called Scape-Ore Swamp. Today, there is little to distinguish the swamp except a short bridge over a creek that moves so slowly that decaying leaves steep the water a deep brown. The forest is dense, quickly trapping the last traces of light when the sun falls below the hill. It's hauntingly empty now, leaving no hint that it was briefly the hottest destination in Lee County. For weeks, it was packed with dozens of Lizardman hunters who set up campers and built fires along the road. By the end of that summer, Lizardman mania died. No one saw the Lizardman for weeks, and a heavily publicized hoax made it all feel like a joke that was getting old. Whatever the Lizardman is, its enthusiasts have connected about a dozen strange occurrences to the creature. Though relatively few people have described anything resembling a lizard, as many have said they saw something brown and hairy. Most sightings happened in the late 80s and early 90s when swamp creatures were simmering in popular culture. Throughout the 80s, DC Comics released a serial tale in 2 movies about a character called the Swamp Thing. A similar character, the Gill Man, made an appearance in the 1987 cult classic, The Monster Squad, which hit video stores a few months before the Lizardman made the news. Only a few sightings have been reported since. It seemed like people in Bishopville alternately laughed at the legend and found it embarrassing, fearing that their town would be remembered as the butt of a national joke. Bishopville kept its distance from the Lizardman for a long time. Even in the summer of 1988, journalists documented the way locals fretted about how their town looked to the outside world and worried that the community's integrity was being traded for a shot at prosperity. Sheriff Truesdale said the joke was on the outsiders. After all, they were the ones traveling to the swamps in South Carolina in the dead of the summer. Still, many were burned by the experience of being thrust into national notoriety. The Post and the Courier sent letters and Facebook messages to more than a dozen people who either reported seeing something strange around the Scape-Ore Swamp or had family members who did. Only 2 responded, including one woman who said she and her mother had been frustrated for decades that their name was connected to the Lizardman. They never said they saw such a thing, she said. They just said they saw something, maybe an animal, run out of the swamp. But cable TV documentaries kept re-airing their statements, and friends kept calling to ask if they had really encountered the Lizardman. The woman asked not to be named, saying she did not want to stir up that talk again and risk her children being bullied for it. Reached by a reporter, her mother said, "I don't want to talk about it," and hung up. And that reaction isn't unusual, for as long as people have had frightening encounters in Scape-Ore Swamp, they have hesitated to talk about them publicly. One construction worker told police he didn't even tell his family he had seen a Bigfoot-like creature because he figured they would say he was drunk, even though he insisted that he wasn't. A teenager who saw something jump in the road said that the people he told laughed at him. They chalked it up to his imagination. Even Davis, who became famous for his sighting, initially kept his story to himself because he thought people wouldn't believe him. There is a wide consensus that he was genuinely frightened by the encounter. Speaking briefly with the Post and the Courier, his aunt said he was terribly upset that night. He was horrified, and she said the experience really affected him. Davis would eventually say that the experience hadn't been worth it. Easterling caught up with him after the frenzy died down. She reported that he had left his high school basketball team and quit his fast food job because interviews and public appearances had taken so much of his time. Hopes of a speaking tour never occurred. Mostly he talked to visitors at the Lizardman Information Center, which is really more than a t-shirt stand. For his time signing autographs and retelling the story, Davis estimated he made about $3,000. He's gotten to where he doesn't want to talk about it anymore, Truesdale told Easterling, according to the 1989 article in The State. It would make me mad too if I saw something and people ridiculed me. Davis quickly fell from the public eye. He didn't reappear in the news again until 2009, when a group of men broke into his Sumter County home, stole drugs and money, and murdered him. The killing inspired a wave of headlines about the demise of the Lizardman witness. Also, let's agree on this. Sheriff Liston Truesdale is the main reason the Lizardman legend became so big. Without Truesdale, there wouldn't be a Lizardman story as we know it. Truesdale didn't dismiss reports like Davis's, even if he cracked a few jokes in the papers about what was lurking in the woods. He didn't feel he could write them off. After all, something was frightening the people who he found reputable. He took detailed statements and threatened to prosecute anyone who filed a hoax. And he kept that promise when an airman from the nearby Shaw Air Force Base, driving a camouflage Toyota with a fake Gatling gun on the hood, claimed he saw the creature near I-20 and shot it in the neck with his handgun.
Spooky, I don't like it here.
Yeah, I wish Dad were here. Come on, let's go find him, huh?
He said he collected a sample of Lizardman's skin, but recanted after the sheriff recognized them as fish scales, admitting he made the story up just to keep the legend alive. In addition to a count of lying to police, Truesdale slapped him with a weapons charge. Truesdale's seriousness made him an enticing character in the media. He played the part too, answering the phone at all hours as reporters called from London and as far away as Australia. After a while, he remarked to the Lee County Observer that he only had time for regular police work after midnight, and the experience had worn him so thin that he fell asleep in the middle of an interview with the Detroit Free Press. Still, he added, the press had the right to know what was going on. The Lizardman wasn't just Lee County news, it was the world's. Sheriff Truesdale died in 2015. Even with the main witnesses and participants in the story of the Lizardman being deceased, the legend of the Lizardman of the Skateboard Swamp continues to intrigue and captivate, leaving us with a mysterious tale that blends folklore and the unknown, inviting curiosity and speculation for generations to come. What are your thoughts about the Lizardman? Let us know in the comments below.
There's 4 of them, 1 o'clock high. They're coming around. Watch.
During World War II, there was no more dangerous place to be than in the skies over German-occupied Europe for a bomber crew. By 1944, thousands of flak batteries and German fighters scoured the air in search of enemies, one being the iconic and deadly B-17 Flying Fortress that could rain down destruction. On November 21st, 1944, an event occurred with the B-17 that seemed impossible, yet it happened. What did the Allied forces witnessing the strange event do? What did the senior man on the ground, British Major John V. Crisp, do to stop the phantasmic plane?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former soldier, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, history professor, historian and book author, and we will answer these questions and other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
The B-17G had a standard crew of 10, a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier doubling as nose gunner, a flight engineer doubling as top turret gunner, a radio operator, 2 waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, and a tail gunner. Bristling with 13 50 caliber machine guns, the B-17 could deliver sweeping damage to enemy fighters. The structural design created a strong aircraft that could also absorb a lot of damage. On November 21st, 1944, 1,291 heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force launched raids against several targets in Germany. The 1st Bombardment Group alone sent 421 B-17 Flying Fortresses against more than a dozen targets. The 401st Squadron was assigned the target of Mersburg Luna to hit the German synthetic oil refineries. One of these, a B-17G, number 43-35845, was a lone aircraft from the 324th Squadron, flown by pilot First Lieutenant Harold R. DeBolt. It was his 33rd mission, and he had a seasoned crew. The force encountered nearly 9/10 cloud cover en route to the target, and over the target as well. The weather did not stop the radar-guided anti-aircraft guns or German fighters. Just before the bombers started their run, enemy fighters appeared and struck home, but there were no losses from the formations. As the bombers approached, the anti-aircraft fire they always expected rose up to greet them. The Germans threw everything from 88mm to 105mm shells that exploded at a pre-designated altitude. The exploding shells released thousands of large pieces of shrapnel that sliced through the thin aluminum skins of the bombers, often wounding or killing the men inside. The hot shrapnel also damaged the aircraft, often cutting oxygen and fuel lines, and most often damaging the engines. A B-17 with 2 engines had a fair chance of making it back to base unless picked up by German fighters. The German fighters broke off as the flak intensified, and de Bolt handed the controls over to the bombardier, who opened the bomb bay doors. Then flak hit the aircraft, and as the rest of the bombers dropped their ordnance and picked up speed, de Bolt's bombs would not drop due to a malfunctioning of the release mechanism. The B-17G, so new in the group that there was not even time to paint a name on her, fell farther behind from the protection of the box formation. Another flak burst underneath the bomber released the bombs, which finally fell, lightening the load and hopefully allowing de Bolt to pick up speed. De Bolt gave full power to the remaining 2 engines, hoping to gain some distance from the Germans on the ground, but they were still taking hits from German ground fire. Getting out was not easy. That was not going to happen, as the flak had shut down the number 2 and 3 engines, with the number 3 engine windmilling and creating dangerous vibrations, with de Bolt unable to feather that engine's propeller blades. The crew threw everything out of the aircraft to help keep it in the air, lightening the weight, including guns and ammunition cases. There was still the danger of enemy fighters locating the stricken bomber, which would have been an easy target, and not having the 50 calibers on board for defense would mean total destruction. De Bolt and his co-pilot plotted a course toward Brussels and ordered the crew to get their parachutes ready. With 2 engines out, and with a third about to die due to flak damage, de Bolt set a course for 270 degrees west and set the controls on autopilot over Belgian territory, where they had a good chance of reaching Allied lines. But would they make it? On the ground, British Major John V. Crisp and his anti-aircraft unit located at Kortenberg, Belgium, watched in fascination as an aircraft came into view, an American B-17 heavy bomber. The observers on the ground saw that the landing gear was down, and it looked as if it was on a final approach for landing. Given that this was not an airfield, the assumption was that the pilots may have had wounded on board and therefore wanted to try to land the aircraft to save their lives. But then the bomber dropped its forward attitude, and the nose dipped toward the earth, causing the soldiers on the ground to drop or scatter, fearing impact. The B-17 landed at a farm just beyond Kortenberg, Belgium, in the village of Holdenburg, on its main landing gear wheels, and upon touching down bounced once, and upon landing again dug one wheel into the ground of the plowed field, causing the bomber to dip a wing, which struck the ground, spinning the aircraft around 45 degrees. 2 engines were still running, and they waited for the crew to climb out, but after several long minutes without anyone emerging, they rose to investigate. There had been no flares fired from the bomber, indicating wounded were on board, and there had been no radio transmissions that they were aware of announcing the bomber's arrival. 20 minutes later, the ranking officer, Major Crisp, decided to inspect the situation, but he did so cautiously. The damaged engines and the other undamaged, still operating engine was spinning with the propellers were whirling, so Crisp had to approach cautiously, and he found his way in to the bomber alone. To his amazement, no one was on board, so he looked for dead crewmen and found none. He did find their abandoned flying gear, flag jackets, helmets, and some uneaten chocolate bars. Major Crisp remained the only person on board while he continued his search for clues as to what happened to the crew. He was puzzled to locate a dozen unused parachutes still on board. How did they get out, he wondered. While searching, he found the flight log in the navigator station that read, "Bad flak." He finally made his way to the cockpit and didn't see any damage to the controls or the instrument panel. No blood, no dead men. Well, during this process, the crew of the B-17 were confirmed safe at a Belgian airfield, but there were still questions. They were all alive and well, and Lieutenant de Bolt reported that he and his crew exited the aircraft near Brussels due to damage sustained by flak. What had happened, according to the statements by de Bolt and the crew, are as follows. The bomber slowly lost altitude, and the crew remained on board as long as they could to exit German territory, and they waited. When the bomber dropped to 2,000 feet, de Bolt gave the order to bail out, and the entire crew safely exited the bomber, and all had good parachutes. They were successful in getting beyond German-held territory, because as they landed, a British ground unit picked them up. However, their B-17 continued flying on autopilot, The location of the B-17's landing was confirmed to be 10 miles southeast of Brussels at Holdenburg, where the British unit was stationed. Investigators arrived at the bomber and found the plane's serial number, and this enabled commanders in the 8th Air Force to identify the plane as part of the 1st Bombardment Division, 91st Bomb Group, 324th Squadron, which was a contingent of B-17Gs that operated out of East Anglia, England. The squadron manifest had the crewmen listed, but they belonged to the 401st Squadron, which created more confusion until it was discovered that the bomber had been transferred from the other unit. The parachutes that remained in the aircraft were still a mystery, as the investigators wondered how the men bailed out. Usually, all the men on board wore their parachutes while in flight, with the exception to the ball turret gunner, and sometimes the pilot and co-pilot would fly with their parachutes nearby in case they were needed. The investigators spoke with the British soldiers and Major Crisp and collected their stories. They also looked at the bomber now in the plowed field. Major Crisp reported that the bomber did not have any exterior damage except what appeared to have happened in the crash. But then again, not being an airman and not familiar with flak damage, his error is understandable. There were discrepancies in the soldiers' statements and what the bomber crew gave in their statement. The soldiers claimed that the bomber came in with all 4 engines operating, which would have been impossible if 2 engines were damaged. DeBolt had stated that 1 engine was destroyed and 1 quit. Why the differences? The best guess is that the soldiers saw the nearest 2 engines working, one at full power, the other choking out and a third dead with the windmilling propeller. If the crew's story is true, it's bizarre that Major Crisp believed that he had found all the parachutes on board. How else could the plane's crew have survived jumping from a plane if not using the parachutes? It's more likely that Major Crisp made an error on identifying the parachutes being on board. Parachutes were often kept on board in special pack sleeves and were so marked, and the empty containers were often stuffed with extra gear, ammo, or even food. They may have looked like parachutes to him. Later, Lieutenant DeBolt affirmed the engine damage and stated in his debriefing that, quote, "We had been hitting the bomb bay. I'll be darned if I know why the bombs didn't explode," end quote. Unfortunately, the official report does not resolve this discrepancy, so we may never know why there were parachutes left behind, if they were parachutes at all. How did this happen? Was it a miracle? Divine intervention? We may never know the answer.
Islam speaks of angels, and also the spirit known as jinns, which are described in the Quran as being able to interact with people. Jinn were created from a smokeless fire, have free will, and are either good or evil, just like humans. The word jinn comes from the Arabic jinn, a plural noun that means both demons or spirits, and also literally hidden from sight. The word genie shares the same Arabic root. So it should come to no surprise that the country known as the Graveyard of Empires should have its share of paranormal activity, especially since over the last few decades, countless Taliban fighters and civilians, as well as soldiers from the US, Britain, and the former Soviet Union and NATO have died on the battlefields of Afghanistan. However, at one small outpost in the country's deep south, both locals and foreign soldiers alike have reported experiencing apparitions, unexplained events, and mystical curses, all in the psychological shadow of years of conflict and death. But what is the real reason for this plethora of unexplained phenomena, and what was found at the forward operating base known as OP Rock? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
One U.S. Marine recounted his experience at the remote site of OP Rock. My unit's motto was, "Not for self, but for the country." If I knew what I was going to have to witness there, I would not do it for myself, and I also would not have done it for my country. He went on to describe his deployment at the post as one of the few absurdly negative experiences I have had being in the Marines. Helmand Province is infamous for many reasons. First, it is at the center of Afghanistan's opium poppy agriculture, and at least before the Taliban returned to power in 2021, it was believed to supply as much as 39% of the world's heroin. The second is, It is the heartland of the Taliban, where more British and American troops were killed than anywhere else in the country during the war. Those troops are gone now, and the Taliban has returned to power, so as a result, more of its secrets are beginning to be revealed. Observation Point Rock, or OP Rock as the soldiers called it, is indistinguishable from the countless abandoned NATO or Afghan National Army bases or outposts. The rock that gives the outpost its name is a nondescript, 100-foot tall mound with a small collapsed tunnel system underneath, apparently built by the Taliban as a defensive position. But when the US Marines and British soldiers occupied the area and started digging to create defensive positions, they made a horrifying discovery. As they were digging, they started to find bones. Not one bone, not two bones, but tons of bones. There were bones for days, wrote the Marine who posted his story online. We could have built our whole observation point out of bones. Locals say that the area had been used as a grave site for centuries, and that it had also been the site of several massacres committed by both sides during the Afghan-Soviet War of the 1980s. I swear there were muzzle flashes. I saw the dim flares again, and it seemed like the entire position was being lit up, the Marine wrote. At first I ducked for cover, but there were no physical or auditory evidence, just lights. Then, almost as abruptly as it started, it ended, and I was back to looking at the land through my fuzzy green lens of my night vision goggles. That's when I heard a chilling whisper in my ear, "Brozei Aryuje," which is loosely translated from Russian, meaning drop your weapon. Other Marines swore they saw and heard figures in the distance that no one else could see, experienced mysterious radio static, or felt drastic changes in temperature. They also reported distressing psychological events, such as constant nightmares, episodes of sleep paralysis, and the constant feeling of being watched. They also had adopted a local dog they called Ugly Betty, who barked loudly and unpredictably even when no one was there. When one group of Marines passed control of OP Rock to British soldiers, they said they believed the place to be haunted. One Marine told the New York Times that he believed OP Rock was a conduit for paranormal activity. Afghan locals believe that the area is both sacred and cursed, owing paranormal activity to the presence of a shrine in the nearby village of Amir Agha. When the US Marines were stationed there, the old bazaar of the town was almost completely deserted and destroyed. Now, as with much of rural Afghanistan, commercial activity has begun to return. A few rickety wooden stores sell household goods, and a couple of motorbikes are parked on the nearby street. The white flag with black Quranic verses symbolizing the Taliban-run country is now officially flown over many of the shacks. The small single-room shrine in the town remains, though it is clearly neglected. In the center is a tall marble tablet with verses from the Quran scribbled around it. It is enclosed in a green metal cage to deter would-be thieves. The shrine is dedicated to Amir Hamza, supposedly the uncle of Muhammad and one of his most trusted commanders. Locals revere him and one of his descendants, Amir Agha, as guardians. His grave is said to lie beneath the shrine, and the town is named in their honor. Jumal Gul, a 35-year-old from the district of Garmsir, heard many stories from his father, a local mullah, about the powers associated with the area. We heard many stories from the US and British Marines who were scared of hearing voices and noises or felt the presence of someone near them. But this isn't the first time this had happened, he says through a translator. When the Russians attacked Amir Agha, we remember that the tanks that came to attack the shrine got stuck in the mud, where they could quickly be destroyed by Mujahideen fighters. To this day, they are stuck, and no one can get them out. The wreckage of armored personnel carriers are still scattered in the surrounding region. Gul says that his father also told him how, in 1982, the Russians launched 2 rockets at the shrine, but the people claim that despite going through a hole in the roof, it disappeared before it hit the grave, and also because of the power of Amir Agha, it went through a window. Lala Jan, the 60-year-old caretaker of the shrine, has his own explanation for the many strange happenings. He says that the Marines in the area came to the shrine many times at night. This scared the locals. He reports he tried to stop them from going in, but the Marines forced everyone to stay inside their houses. The Marines are said to have taken precious objects from the shrine, such as white marble stones with Quranic verses inscribed on them, which locals claim had been there for centuries. John believes that this set a curse in motion, punishing the foreign soldiers for the act of desecration. This is a clean land of the Shahadin, or people who die in the Islamic way. We have lost our old stones that provided us with protection for centuries. Afghanistan's religious and spiritual traditions augment Islam with local mythology, as well as elements of Buddhism and Zoroastrianism, but the Islamic traditions of Djinn also resonates with the stories of hauntings and the unexplainable. Regardless of one's belief system, it is no surprise that a place so scarred by conflict and suffering would generate such feelings of unease and even terror. Hearing voices or seeing hallucinations are not symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, but people who are traumatized can dissociate, where you can have abnormal perceptual experiences, says psychiatrist Anthony Feinstein of the University of Toronto. In the case of the military outpost, he says, it doesn't help that you are very cut off from things. Your only company is a small group of men. That can contribute to it, and you don't have any reality checks because you're only interacting with your company. You can't interact with anybody else. Because there's no contact with others, you are locked and baked in your own belief system. That is how I would conceptualize something like this. The war for now has ceased, and an uneasy peace has returned to most of these lands with the strictures and religious rules of the Taliban. American and British soldiers have departed all of Afghanistan, not just OP Rock. As with so much in the series of twisted and messy wars, things can look different depending on one perspective. In this case, one culture's vengeful spirit is another's guardian angel. What do you think caused the hauntings? Let us know in the comments below.
World War I began on July 28, 1914 and ended on November 11, 1918. Referred to by contemporaries as the Great War, its belligerents included much of Europe, the Russian Empire, the United States, and the Ottoman Empire, the German Empire. Fighting also expanded into the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia. One of the deadliest conflicts in history, an estimated 9 million people were killed in combat, while over 5 million civilians died from military occupation, bombardment, hunger, and disease. However, a lesser-known story, a supernatural tale of horror, was also killing troops. During the battle around the area of Mons, Belgium, part of the 1914 Battle of the Frontiers, a strange and frightening specter haunted the region of no man's land between the German and British trenches, something that seemed as incredible as it was horrific. Were these just stories circulated as rumors, or was there some truth to them? Was there an animal or beast that actually attacked and killed soldiers? Was it a single creature, or simply packs of wild dogs driven mad by war and hunger? Or was it, in fact, something evil?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former soldier, Marine Corps scout sniper, history professor, historian, and book author. And we will answer these questions and other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
After Great Britain declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary on August 4, 1914, the British Expeditionary Force, commanded by Field Marshal John French, landed in France. General Alexander von Kluck was the commander of the German First Army tasked with penetrating into northern France. The British pushed to the front to stop the German invasion into France, only to be halted and pushed back by the superior enemy force. Thus was the beginning of trench warfare and the defensive British bastion of Mons, which stopped the Germans from moving west. Mons was part of the Flemish Bergen municipality, a Walloon region in southwestern Belgium between Trouville and Haine rivers, strategically poised at the junction of the Nîmes-Blaton Canal and the Canal du Centre. Mons became typical of the stalemate trench warfare style synonymous with the war on the Western Front, especially after the First Battle of the Marne from September 6th to 9th, which halted the Germans 13 miles from Paris. But after the lines had been drawn and a tenuous calm descended, both sides caught their breath, but not for long. Dealing with all the terrors of landmines, costly trench attacks, machine guns firing, artillery barrages, and later the introduction of poison gas, a new terror had emerged. Among the deep cratered shell holes and decaying corpses of both men and beasts, and the twisted barbed wire, soldiers reported seeing shadows, an animal of some kind moving fast, before screams of men being attacked were heard. Some soldiers actually reported seeing a large wolf-like creature, only glimpsed in the glow of an overhead flare or when the light an artillery shell illuminated the dark sky. These shadowy specters moved quickly among the corpses or attacked men returning from patrols. Sentries on guard duty, British, French, Belgian, and German, all reported seeing these large beasts, almost always at night, darting back and forth as if hunting. Gunshots would be heard, screams of men, and then later the torn bodies of soldiers, friend and foe alike, would be found. Both the German and British soldiers heard the mournful howl of a wolf, sometimes what seemed to be more than one. Rumors then spread among the British and Commonwealth troops that the beast was a hybrid animal created by the Germans and trained to attack them. This rumor was spurious, but it was documented that the wild dogs were a danger, and wounded men or those alone or in small units were vulnerable, even with loaded rifles. There was also the possibility that wolves, not very common, and the last recorded wolf was seen around 1912, but possibly still inhabited the forests that were not destroyed and roamed the countryside. One explanation may be a breed of dog called the Groenendael, or Belgian Shepherd, which was a fairly common breed, and a new breed of working dog, which was a derivative of the wolf shepherd and other working breeds. In fact, the Belgian army used them as rescue and messenger dogs, and the possibility that some became separated from their handlers, who may have been killed or captured and gone wild, seems likely. It is also possible that the seldom seen wolves bred with these dogs, creating an even larger and more aggressive and intelligent hybrid, and being feral, would have had no problem taking down a healthy grown man. Canadian war veteran F.G. Newhouse first published his incredible story about this phenomenon in 1919. He reported such as the German experiments conducted by a Dr. Gottlieb Hochmuller to introduce these animals as weapons, following the transplanting of the brain of an insane mental patient into the head of a large Siberian wolfhound. He also gave detailed accounts of a Captain Yeskes and his patrol being found mauled to death after failing to return from a patrol, but no records have verified this event, nor the existence of any Dr. Hochmuller. However, many of his claims have been refuted and can be dismissed by the scientific community. What is not refuted is the fact that soldiers were mauled to death, but they could have been killed in combat and simply fed upon as a matter of circumstance. Given the thousands of dead soldiers from both sides littering no man's land, and very little means to retrieve even the wounded, the so-called hellhound or hounds would have fed well. British and Allied veterans spoke little of these events, although some Germans did. One luminary German, the famous author and one of the most decorated World War I veterans, Captain Ernst Junger, had his opinion. Junger fought from the first day of the war to the end of the war and was awarded the Iron Cross in both classes, the Wounded Badge in Gold for 7 wounds, the Pour le Mérite, also called the Blue Max, and the Order of Hohenzollern medals for bravery. He said this, quote, "These stories were probably true to some degree. We have our legends of the devil dogs, known as Teufelhunde, that roamed the forests, and many believed that was what these were, rather than spirits. That is laughable. Ironically, due to their tenacity in battle, that was the name we gave the American Marines in 1917, Teufelhunde, or devil dogs." End quote. So what was the monster of Mon? Wild dogs, wolves, an evil apparition, or just the hallucinations of exhausted and tortured minds of war-weary soldiers? Perhaps we may never know for sure.
Imagine a world where scientists believe they could bring the dead back to life. A world where electricity could spark life, defy nature, and push the boundaries of human understanding. This isn't the stuff of fiction, but a real-life experiment that happened over 200 years ago. The early 19th century was the age of transformation. The world was on the brink of scientific revolution. Electricity was no longer just a curiosity. It was beginning to be understood as a force of nature, capable of powering cities and perhaps
even life itself. Meanwhile, the political landscape was equally turbulent. The Napoleonic Wars were reshaping Europe, and the Industrial Revolution was beginning to change the very fabric of society. However, amidst this backdrop of change, one man stood at the forefront of the scientific unknown. Giovanni Aldini, an ambitious scientist in the early 1800s, sought to unlock the ultimate secret, the line between life and death. His experiments would shock the world, horrify audiences, and even inspire one of the greatest horror stories ever written. With a flick of a switch, Aldini hoped to unlock the secrets of life and death. But would his terrifying experiment succeed, or would it lead to disaster? This is the story of the real Dr. Frankenstein, the man who tried to bring back the dead. But did his experiments work? And whatever happened to him? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Born in 1762 in Bologna, Italy, Giovanni Aldini was the nephew of Luigi Galvani, the scientist who discovered galvanism, the idea that electricity could animate muscles. But Giovanni took it a step further. What if electricity could bring life back to the lifeless? What if it could reanimate the dead? In 1780, Galvani made a remarkable discovery while dissecting frogs. He noticed that when a metal scalpel touched the frog's exposed nerves, its legs twitched as if alive. Galvani believed he had uncovered animal electricity, a mysterious force within living creatures that could be harnessed to reanimate the dead tissue. Galvani's discovery sparked intense debate. His rival, Alessandro Volta, argued that electricity wasn't coming from within the animal, but was instead generated by the interaction of metals. This disagreement led Volta to develop the first true battery, the voltaic pile, ushering the age of controlled electrical currents. Inspired by his uncle's discoveries, Aldini sought to take the galvanism further. He believed that electricity was not just a force within animals, but a key to unlocking the very nature of life itself. In 1803, Aldini made a bold move that would change history forever. He was granted the opportunity to conduct a public demonstration in London using the body of George Forster, a convicted murderer recently executed by hanging. Forster, a laborer from London, had been found guilty of the brutal murder of his wife and child, whose bodies were later discovered in the Paddington Canal. Despite his protests of innocence, he was sentenced to death by hanging. Forster's fate was sealed, and his body handed over to the authorities for dissection, a standard procedure for executed criminals. But Aldini saw it as an opportunity. Instead of merely dissecting the body, he proposed an experiment, a daring attempt to revive the dead using galvanic currents. As the crowd watched in horror and awe, Aldini applied electrical currents to Forster's body. The result was nothing short of shocking. His muscles twitched violently, his eyes opened, his hand raised and clenched. The audience was terrified, but also fascinated. Could this be the beginning of reanimation? Despite the dramatic response, the body remained lifeless. The experiment had proven that electricity could animate a corpse's muscles, yet it was clear that true resurrection was still beyond reach. Aldini, however, was not discouraged. If this much movement could be achieved with a man who had been dead for hours, what might be possible with a fresher subject? After the shocking display with George Forster, Aldini was determined to go further. He requested access to another recently executed criminal, one whose identity has been lost to time, but whose case presented a legal nightmare for authorities. The issue? If Aldini succeeded in restoring life, the convict would technically be alive once more, and under the law, he couldn't be executed a second time, meaning he would walk free. The government refused Aldini's request. But the fear wasn't just about legal implications, it was existential. If Aldini's work continued, it could force society to reconsider the nature of life and death itself. Was electricity the key to immortality, or was it simply animating a lifeless corpse with no soul? Despite the controversy, Aldini pressed on. He continued his demonstrations across Europe, electrifying cadavers before a horrified audience. Some hailed him as a visionary, believing he had unlocked the secrets that could change medicine forever. Others dismissed him as a charlatan, accusing him of playing God with forces he barely understood. His work never led to true reanimation, and over time, public interest faded. Aldini himself would retreat from the spotlight, his experiments fading into obscurity. But his legacy would not die. The eerie spectacle of his electrical experiments traveled across Europe, sparking both horror and fascination. Among those who heard these chilling tales was a young woman who would change literature forever, Mary Shelley. In 1816, during a stormy summer at Lake Geneva, Shelley and a group of writers, including her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Lord Byron, challenged each other to write the scariest ghost story ever imaginable. But Shelley's inspiration wasn't just a ghost story. It was grounded in real science. Shelley had read about Aldini's experiments. She had heard whispers of corpses twitching under the force of electricity, of lifeless hands clenching into fists, and from this she imagined the terrifying tale of Dr. Victor Frankenstein, a man obsessed with defying death. Her novel, Frankenstein, published in 1818, would become one of the most enduring horror stories of all time, cementing Aldini's place not just in scientific history, but in the world of literary legend. Giovanni Aldini's legacy has lived on, inspiring not only the pages of fiction, but also modern science. Today, we push the boundaries of life and death with technologies like cryonics, cloning, and organ transplants. But there's another frontier emerging, one that blurs the line between life and simulation. That is, AI-driven reanimation. Artificial intelligence is now being used to recreate voices, personalities, and even simulate interactions with the deceased. Some believe that one day, a person's thoughts and memories could be transferred into an AI system, allowing for a kind of digital resurrection. It's not the physical reanimation like Aldini attempted, but the question remains the same. Where do we draw the line between life and an illusion of life? So, 200 years ago, Aldini stood on the edge of science, testing the limits of life and death. Today, we continue his work, just with different tools. But the question remains, if we could truly bring back the dead, should we?
The Winter War began with the Soviet invasion of Finland on November 30th, 1939, 3 months after the outbreak of World War II, and ended only 3.5 months later with the Moscow Peace Treaty on March 13th, 1940. But why was the war over so quickly? What happened to the Soviet army that had them so shaken? When legends and folklore connect in a historical context, the story becomes even more bizarre. One of these theories of the war is steeped in pagan folklore and is, as of yet, unproven through research and documentation, although the little evidence that was available makes for a compelling case. What really killed over 100 Russian soldiers in the depths of a January winter in 1940? If the Finns killed them in battle, why did they not take credit to bolster home morale, to impress the Germans whom they wanted as an ally, and demoralize their enemies? How could so many Soviet soldiers have been killed in a battle without any Finnish casualties?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Finland is still a predominantly Lutheran nation, with other Christian and a few Jewish groups. However, there are many Finns, especially among the Sami people in Lapland and in Karelia, who were and are still polytheistic pagans. Believing in shamanism, superstition, and mythology, they worshipped a god called Ukko, and they were a small minority as well as a rather isolated group. Many of the Finnish soldiers still had their superstitions, and some places were deemed mysterious and were to be avoided. Such locations were Vadovara Mountain and the Kibini Mountains, which were sacred to the Sami people. The mountains were known for their pagan populations, complete with their own language, religion, superstitions, and folklore. It was one of these superstitions that would take root during the Winter War. The Soviets invaded Finland on November 30th, 1939, and the war ended 3.5 months later. But there was something that happened during that war that has never been explained. Part of that short war was the Battle of the Kola, which lasted from December 7th, 1939 to March 13, 1940, which extended into both the Kola Peninsula and the Karelian Isthmus. The only direct avenue of approach for the Soviets into Finland was through the Karelian Isthmus, a narrow strip of land bordered by mountains and dotted with lakes and rivers, or they could come across the White Sea into the Kola Peninsula, with Red Army units based in Murmansk driving in from the north. The Finnish army of 160,000 men faced an invading Soviet army consisting of about 450,000 soldiers and 2,000 tanks. The Finns planned on making Karelia a choke point, a bottleneck, from which they could block, starve, and kill the communists. As the war started, the Finns faced the onslaught of the Soviet 8th Red Army, commanded by Ivan Nikitich Khabarov, and they stopped the massive force, inflicting heavy casualties on several occasions. However, some small units managed to get through specific areas successfully, but they also took heavy losses. The Battle of Doppelganger on December 12, 1939, was part of the larger Battle of Kola. It was the first major Finnish victory of the war, and came at a crucial time for the morale of the entire Finnish military and the nation at large. Its importance to not only the fighting on the northern shore of Lake Ladoga forced the Soviets to also launch a mass attack into the Kola Peninsula as a flanking maneuver. As a result of these setbacks, Khabarov was removed from his post on December 13, 1939, and replaced by Spanish Civil War and Russo-Japanese War of 1938 veteran Colonel General Grigory Mikhailovich Stern. The Finnish 12th Division, commanded by Colonel Lauri Taveti Tianen until January 31, 1940, was quite successful, and then he was succeeded in command by Antero Svensson. The 12th Division was part of 4 Corps, commanded by Major General Johan Voldemar Haglund, a World War I veteran and a seasoned commander. Tianen was responsible for placing his 8,000 men along a 70-mile front. As he had limited resources and few men, his plan was to defend key points in strength and set ambushes along the forest trails. The Finns had very few artillery pieces, while the Soviets had several hundred guns of varying calibers. The fight would be one of hit-and-run guerrilla warfare, and the Finns would leave one area open for the Soviets to occupy. This small, forested mountain would have been advantageous for either side, especially for artillery, but the deep snow and thick woods made transporting the heavy guns impossible. The Finns had several advantages. They were bred and properly prepared, trained and clothed for the brutal winter. They knew the terrain. They controlled the few unimproved roads. They had excellent snipers, such as Simo Heya, and commandos, such as Laurie Allen Torney. They also had highly mobile Arctic ski commandos, used as a reconnaissance and harassing force. Also, the Finnish soldiers knew how to live off the land, growing up as stealth hunters and farmers. They could stalk and track game, which is far more difficult than tracking men. Tiananmen decided to control these open avenues of approach, run commando units to hit and run behind the Soviet lines, inflicting whatever damage they could, and constantly harass the enemy. The Soviets had planned a two-pronged attack, up through Karelia and also from the east by pushing through Kola from the north. One of the objectives was the Kabini Mountains, which rise over 3,000 feet and dominate the forested region and valleys below. If the Soviets wanted the mountain, they could have it, for a while. The only way up and down the mountain was by a series of narrow pathways that were controlled by Finns in the valley below. However, as the story goes, the Soviets were warned not to go to the mountain by the local Sami people. They claimed that bad spirits, demons such as the Otso, or Bear Man, and the Virunsusi, a type of werewolf, lived there. Understandably, the Soviets laughed at such suggestions, believing that the locals were either rubes or trying to dissuade them. Seeing that the approach to the Kabini Mountains was not covered by Finns, a reconnaissance company was sent. Every commander wants to control the high ground. When Finnish scouts saw Soviet patrols scouting around the mountain, they did not molest them. They just watched and counted how many men were in the unit. A company of Soviet infantry, over 100 men, passed right by a platoon of Finns in perfect winter camouflage, never seeing them as they walked up to the mountain, just passing the Finns hiding away a few yards from their sight. The Soviets took up their positions as an observation unit and waited for their main force to arrive. This is where things took a strange turn. According to the story, an alternative reason why the Finns did not occupy the mountain and let their enemy have it was superstition. The exact date of this event is not recorded, but possibly during the second week of January 1940, the Finnish forces relaxed in their defensive positions, the closest being 1 mile away from the mountain. This gave the Finns perfect visibility to monitor any daylight movement by the Soviets should they come down the mountain and push through the forest and into the valley. Finnish commando teams from the 12th Division consisted of 4 men each, and they were scattered along the forest, each able to fall back if they saw the enemy advance. Eventually, if the Soviets came, each of the several dozen teams would then engage, fall back past the group behind them like a collapsing bag. This was to lure more of the enemy into the final kill zone, while reducing their numbers as they advanced. Wolves and bears were a constant threat to farmers and soldiers, especially in winter, so when the soldiers on both sides heard the mournful howling, they posted lookouts as a precaution. After several nights of minus 20 to 40 below zero without any activity, the quiet of the night was shattered. The sounds of howling, screaming, and gunfire echoed across the valley from the mountain, and the Finns wondered which of their units were engaging the enemy. Through 2 nights they heard battle, clearly rifle and machine gun fire, and explosions, such as grenades. As dawn came on the 3rd day, a Finnish patrol went forward slowly, and after a full 2 days came back with a report. What they claimed to have seen was unbelievable. They reported that every Soviet soldier was dead. Men were torn apart, torsos hanging in trees minus arms, heads, and legs. Limbs and heads lay everywhere, the bodies all contorted on the ground, with some seeming to have been disemboweled. Bodies in a similar condition were buried headfirst into the iron-hard frozen ground, far beneath the meter-deep snow. Spent ammunition casings littered the ground. Frozen blood was everywhere, painting the snow red. Their conclusion was that the firefight must have been furious. But what about the state of the bodies? Weapons did not do that type of damage. Yet the most puzzling thing was, if the enemy fought was a Finnish unit, where were the dead Finns? Why were there no wounded on both sides? Why did this attack or this battle come as a complete surprise to the Finns? This disconcerting situation was, from what very little was known, was probably sent to Stalin, hence his removing of several officers for incompetence. Major General Hagelin's response was, supposedly, quote, "They met their fate, however it arrived, and I would decorate the men involved if I knew who they were." The most recent list of the number of Finnish soldiers killed related to the Winter War between November 30th, 1939 and December 31st, 1940, were 16,725 killed in action, with another 3,671 who were badly wounded who died in hospital during that short time period, 1 month. The Soviets lost over 200,000 soldiers in battle, and most due to the weather and the cold. Yet the Soviets would come back to invade Finland again in 1941, and Finland would join Germany as an ally in the massive struggle on the Eastern Front. But these questions still lingered. So who or what killed the Soviet soldiers on that mountain? If it was wolves or bears, with the amount of ammunition expended, where were the dead animals? Was there an evil presence, at least for the Soviets, that attacked them, perhaps defending the Finnish people? Did werewolves or werebears exist and kill the soldiers? As crazy as that may sound. This is all supposition, but it does make for an interesting discussion regarding the paranormal. Perhaps we will know the answer one day.
One by one, they died in their sleep, thousands of miles from home. Their average age was 33. All but one of the 117 dead were healthy men. Something was killing Hmong men in their sleep, and doctors couldn't figure out what was causing their deaths. They had only spent a few months on American soil from their home country of Laos. There was no obvious cause of death. None of them had been sick, physically at least. Doctors gave their deaths a name, the kind that reeks of defeat and of the undetermined, a label that was on the edge of the known medical world. It was called Sudden Unexpected Nocturnal Death Syndrome, or SUNS. But the Hmong didn't buy it because their families knew exactly what was killing their kin. It was called the Sog Suam, and it would want more blood. But what is the Sog Suam? And did the killings ever stop? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Something was killing Hmong men in their sleep, and no one could figure out what it was. There was no obvious cause of death. The men weren't clustered together physically speaking, but they were united by their heritage and dislocation from Laos, but little else. Doctors announced the men died of Sudden Unexpected Nocturnal Death Syndrome, SUNS. It didn't do much in terms of diagnosis or treatment, but it had to be called something. Over 25 years later, Shelley Adler's book pieced together what happened, drawing on interviews with the Hmong population and by analyzing scientific literature. Adler, a professor at the University of California, San Francisco, came to a stunning conclusion. In a sense, the Hmong were killed by their beliefs in the spirit world, even if the mechanisms of their death was likely an obscure genetic cardiac arrhythmia that is prevalent in Southeast Asia. By 1986, the Hmong deaths had slowed, but remained a striking epidemiological enigma. Alder was a graduate at UCLA studying traditional belief narratives at the time. She had been researching what is called nocturnal pressing spirit attacks, or what scientific literature called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is known to just about all cultures, and it is almost always associated with nocturnal evil. In China, it's called the Bei Gui Ya, which translates to hell by a ghost. The Hungarians know it as Bazokani Nayomis, witch pressure. In Newfoundland, the spirit that comes is called the Old Hag, and the experience of sleep paralysis is ag-rog, hag-ridden. The Dutch name comes closest to what English speakers know. They call the presence Nachtmerrie, the nightmare. The mare in question comes from the German Mar, or the Norse Mara, which denotes a generally female supernatural being who, in Adler's words, lay on people's chests, suffocating them. Across cultures, nightmare visits play out in very similar ways. Victims experience the strange feeling of being awake while they have a realistic perception of their environment they can't move. Worse, they feel an overwhelming fear and dread accompanied by chest pressure and difficulty breathing. Scientists have a pretty good grasp on how all of this happens. During sleep paralysis, a person experiences an out-of-sequence REM state. In REM, rapid eye movement sleep, we dream and our minds shut off the physical control of the body. We're supposed to be temporarily paralyzed, but we're not supposed to be conscious in REM sleep. Yet, that is precisely what happens during sleep paralysis. It's a mix of the brain states that are normally held separate. Some people who have an experience of sleep paralysis tend to feel that some horrible evil being is near them. I just knew this presence was there, an ominous presence. Not only could I see it, but I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't do anything, one victim told Adler. This feeling is consistent across cultures, even if it goes by different names and presents itself through the culture one knows. I myself experienced sleep paralysis when I came home from an 11-month deployment in Iraq. Standing in the doorway of my bedroom was a dark entity with snake-like hair, or perhaps he was an angry Rastafarian. I'm not quite sure, as it was really dark. It raised a decapitated head in my direction and grinned evilly. I screamed with my mouth fully open, yet emitted no sound. As the entity slowly neared, I was able to snap out of my paralysis. I threw my magic pillow at it to buy me some time as I jumped to my feet. When I looked towards the doorway again, it was gone. I woke up more scared than I had ever been in my life. But was it really there, or just a nightmare? Probably the latter, but at that moment, it did indeed feel real. But there is one big difference between sleep paralysis, which impacts a substantial percentage of the global population at least once, and what the Hmong immigrants experienced in the 1980s. The evil Rastafarian that I saw in my bedroom was terrifying, but harmless. But whatever happened in the night to the Hmong killed them. Adler studied the Hmong and their relationship to what they called the Sag Suam for years, and that research forms the core of her book. Adler collected dozens of experiences of sleep paralysis among the Hmong, both from her own interviews and from other researchers. One 49-year-old Adler interviewed provided this typical experience. I remember a few months after I first came here, I was asleep. I turned out the light and everything, and then, all of a sudden, I felt that I could not move. I just felt it, but I didn't see anything. But then I tried to move my hand, but I couldn't. I kept trying, but I couldn't even move. I knew it was the Sog Swam. I was so scared, I could hardly breathe. I thought, who will help me? What if I die? Heather found that the nightmare attacks were part of the beliefs held by both animists, which is the belief that inanimate objects can be alive, and the Christian Hmong. A powerful folklore had built up around the Sog Swam that included both causes and cures for the attacks. When the Hmong don't worship properly, do not perform their religious rituals properly, or forget to sacrifice, then the ancestor spirits or the village spirits do not want to guard them, one man explained to Adler. That's why the evil spirit is able to come and get them. And for a lot of reasons, the Hmong in the late 1970s and early 1980s were not able to worship properly. The ethnic group fought a guerrilla war against the government of Laos with US backing during the Vietnam War. When the Laotian communists won, many Hmong immigrated for the United States to avoid reprisals. The US government decided to scatter the Hmong randomly across the US to 53 different cities, breaking up immigration patterns we generally see. In short order, the Hmong organized and made a secondary migration to California, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. The immigrants ran into all kinds of problems making their way to the States. Highland Laos, where farming and hunting were the norm, was not Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Fresno. Unemployment was obscenely high, and the sense of community that many had enjoyed in the old country was gone. Some Hmong felt that they had not properly honored the memories of their ancestors, which was a known risk factor among the Hmong for being visited by the Sog Swam. Once the nightmare visitations began, a shaman was often needed to set things right. And in the scattered communities of the Hmong across the country, they might not have access to the right person. Without access to traditional rituals and shamans, the Hmong were unable to provide themselves the psychic protection from the spirits of their sleep. Drawing on all this evidence, Adler makes the provocative claim that the Laotian immigrants of the 1980s were in some sense killed by their powerful cultural belief in night spirits. It is my contention that in the context of severe and ongoing stress related to cultural disruption and national resettlement exacerbated by the intense feelings of powerlessness about existence in the United States, and from the perspective of a belief system in which evil spirits have the power to kill men who do not fulfill their religious obligations, Adler writes, the solitary Hmong men, confronted by the terror of the nightmare and aware of its murderous intent, can die of sons. Her argument amounts to a stirring and chilling case for the power of nocebo, the flip side to the placebo effect. While placebo studies have grown in importance, the nocebo effect has not been studied well in scientific literature, in part because of the ethical issues involved in deliberately doing something that might harm people. Limited studies suggest that it is real and it is powerful. For example, doctors have found that patients made to feel anxious need larger amounts of opiates after surgery than other people. They found that pretending to expose people who say they are sensitive to electromagnetic radiation to cell phone signals can give them debilitating headaches. Even patients' levels of side effects from arthritis medication seem determined by those patients' belief about those medicines. Logically speaking, if the evidence shows the upside of a belief, why wouldn't we believe in the downside too? If you're still unsure that the nocebo effect could lead to premature death, Adler cites one stunning example of the effect from China. A team of researchers found that Chinese Americans die younger than expected if they have a combination of disease and a birth year which Chinese astrology and medicine considers ill-fated. That is to say, if they were born in a year that was astrologically linked to poor lung health, they would die an average of 5 years earlier from lung-related disease than someone born in some other year with the same disease. Similar effects were not found in white populations around them. And how much sooner you died depended on the people's strength of commitment to traditional Chinese culture. So, if you were born under a bad astrological sign, you died 5 years younger from the same diseases as people born under good signs. Results like these seem improbable or anti-reason, but Adler's book uses her understanding of both science and traditional belief structures to argue for what she calls local biology. Since meaning has biological consequences, and meanings vary across cultures, biology can operate differently in different contexts, she writes. In other words, biology is local. The same biological processes in different places have different effects on people. The truth is, we don't understand the relationship between belief and biology quite as well as we'd like to think. The nightmare is a link between our biological and cultural selves. While people of all cultures experience sleep paralysis in similar ways, the specific form and intensity it takes varies by culture. Either way, the nightmare conjures up the monsters waiting in the darkness. The legend of spirit doubles can be traced back thousands of years and was present in many cultures of the past. Perhaps the most well-known reference to spirit doubles or alter egos is the doppelganger, a word still used today to refer to a person that is physically or behaviorally similar to another person. But what is the origin of the doppelganger? And do they really exist? And moreover, what do they want? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Doppelganger is a German word for double goer and refers to a wraith that casts no shadows and is a replica of a living person. They were considered harbingers of bad luck or even omens of impending doom. A doppelganger seen by a person's relative or friend was said to signify that illness or danger would befall that person, while seeing one's own doppelganger was said to be an omen of death. Some accounts of doppelgangers suggest that they might attempt to provide advice to a person they shadow, but that this advice can be misleading or malicious. They may also attempt to plant sinister ideas in the victim's mind to cause fear or confusion. For this reason, people were advised to avoid speaking with their doppelganger at all costs. The subject of the double has a long history, particularly in Greek literature. In Greek mythology, Narcissus falls in love with his reflection, and that's where we get the word narcissist. In Norse folklore, they describe entities known as bardagar,
ghostly beings that preceded their living counterparts, taking their places at various activities and performing their actions in advance. The spirit would have the subject's footsteps, voice, scent, or appearance, and overall demeanor, and would precede them in a location or activity, resulting in witnesses believing they had seen or heard the actual person before the person physically arrives. This bears a subtle difference from the doppelganger, with a less sinister connotation. People from the Orkney Island in Scotland feared a small, fairy-like creature called trolls. According to legend, trolls would give birth to children who were apt to be sickly. Therefore, pregnant women were carefully guarded from the trolls, who would often steal healthy human babies and replace them with their own children, known as changelings, who would transform into exact replicas of the stolen children. Many Native American creation myths likewise have similar legends. The Hopi referred to twins who were called the child of the sun and the child of water. The Hopi also believed in the duality of the upper world and the underworld. That is, whatever's happening here in the upper world, the opposite is happening in the underworld. One of the most famous depictions of doppelgangers comes from the 1851 sketch and 1864 watercolor called How They Met Themselves by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. The painting depicts two medieval lovers walking through the woods at twilight when they encounter their doubles, who glow supernaturally. The man draws his sword in astonishment, while his lover appears to collapse in shock. While doppelganger cases are said to be works of fiction, there are a number of real-life cases in which individuals claim to have met their sinister double. Among the most noteworthy is Abraham Lincoln's experience, as chronicled by Noah Brooks in his book, Washington in Lincoln's Time, 1895. According to his account, soon after Lincoln was elected in 1860, he arrived home one day and looked into the bureau mirror, where he saw himself reflected in double. Lincoln said, "Nearly at full length, but my face had two separate and distinct images." Lincoln noticed that although the images were nearly identical, one was a little paler, say 5 shades, than the other. His wife was said to be very worried and told Lincoln she believed that the paleness of half the dual image was a bad omen. Lincoln would live to serve his first full term, but not live to finish his second. Percy Bysshe Shelley was a brilliant poet in his own right. Although he's mainly remembered as the husband of Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, one would assume that Mary, the horror writer, would have been the one to see the ghosts and monsters, but it was in fact Percy who witnessed the doppelgangers. Shortly before Percy drowned in a sailing accident in 1812, he confessed to Mary that he had met his doppelganger many times. These confrontations included one particularly haunting experience, where he walked into a terrace only to be greeted by his doppelganger, who asked him, "How long do you mean to be content?" Strangely, Percy's doppelganger was also witnessed by his close friend Jane Williams, who saw it passing by her window on a route frequently walked by Percy to a dead end, but never returning. Another famous tale comes from Catherine the Great, the powerful 18th century Empress of Russia, who was known to be stoic and a dangerous figure. She was not fazed by small matters, such as seeing her own ghostly doppelganger take over her throne. It is said that one night, Catherine was lying in her bed when worried servants told her they had just seen her enter the throne room. When Catherine set out to investigate, she found her doppelganger sitting calmly on her throne. Catherine immediately told her sentries to shoot at her ghostly double. The stories don't tell us whether the bullets had any effect on the spectral empress, but the doppelganger did disappear after the encounter. However, Catherine died soon afterwards, in her sleep from a stroke. Yet another monarch to see their doppelganger was Queen Elizabeth I of England, who reigned from 1558 to 1603, and was the last of the Tudor dynasty to rule the country. Widely recognized as a charismatic, level-headed, and savvy monarch, she was the kind of person one wouldn't expect to dabble with the paranormal. According to the Queen, the spectral Elizabeth was lying motionless on her bed, almost like a corpse laid out for a presentation. The experience was particularly haunting to her, because she knew that such appearances are said to be a certain sign of death, but she perhaps thought it to be a figment of her imagination caused by her elderly, stressed-out mind. Yet Queen Elizabeth II died soon after seeing the doppelganger from blood poisoning. But is there any real truth to the doppelganger? Why, yes, there is, although perhaps not a nefarious one. With the advent of social media, there have been several reported cases of people finding their twin stranger online, a modern term for the doppelganger. There are several websites where users can upload a photo of themselves, and facial recognition software attempts to match them with another user of like appearance. Some of these sites reports they have found numerous living doppelgangers. In scientific applications, research has found that people who are true lookalikes have more similar genes than people who do not look like each other. They share genes affecting not only the face, but also some of their physique and behavior. While many today still believe in the existence of an evil double self, some scientists believe that the phenomenon occurs based on stimulation to certain parts of the brain, which causes errors in spatial reasoning. Others believe it is the result of a vision, hallucination, or that we live in a parallel universe in which everything in this world is replicated in another dimension. Whatever the truth behind doppelgangers, their legend has instilled both fear and wonder in people for thousands of years. In the world of cryptozoology, there exists a creature aptly named the Dogman. Dogmen superficially resemble werewolves, but there's a clear difference between these monsters. Dogmen are creatures that are purported to be part human and part dog. This mix of traits gives them a special combination of the best qualities from both humans and dogs. Here are some important things to know about their physiology. Dogmen can stand on their hind legs and reach heights of 6 feet. They can walk or run on legs that look like humans, and when they're on all fours, they can sprint as fast as 45 miles an hour. They have hands that are similar to human hands, complete with thumbs. These hands make it easier for them to do things with their fingers, like grabbing or holding objects. Their coats are shaggy and come in brown or a mix of black, brown, and tan colors. These coats help them to keep warm and protected. Dogmen have excellent night vision, allowing them to see well in the dark. They are also skilled at tracking prey, even better than bloodhounds or basset hounds. But do they really exist? And what evidence do we have of their existence? And how are they created? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
An unknown figure walking around a perimeter fence at the Amarillo Zoo. The creature is wolf-like, I guess. It was spotted at around 1 a.m. in May 21st. Apparently there was no sign of entry into the zoo. No animals or people were harmed. The city is now encouraging people to submit ideas for what they think it might be, saying, quote, "We just want the Amarillo community to have fun with this."
No. One of the earliest stories about dogmen comes from a Greek physician named Ctesias, who traveled to the mountains of India around 400 BC. He wrote about a tribe of people with dog-like heads wearing animal skins who couldn't speak but communicated by barking. These creatures had tails like dogs but longer and hairier, and they were said to live longer, up to 170 or even 200 years of age. Over the years, more stories emerged. Alexander the Great claimed to have fought them in India. Herodotus saw them in Libya, and the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder mentioned them in his book Natural History. A Chinese Buddhist missionary even spotted them on an island to the east of Fusang. Even the famous explorer Marco Polo wrote about people with dog-like heads. Some believe that Saint Christopher, a figure in the Christian faith, was a dogman who wished to become human and eventually got his wish. According to the medieval Irish Passion of Saint Christopher, this Christopher was one of the dogheads, a race that had the heads of dogs and ate human flesh. It was commonly accepted at the time that there were several types of races, the cynocephalous, or dog-headed people, being one of many people believed to populate the world. The German bishop and pope, Walter of Speyer, portrayed St. Christopher as a giant of the cynocephalic species in the land of Chananians who ate human flesh and barked. Eventually, Christopher met the Christ child, regretted his former behavior, and received baptism. He too was rewarded with human appearance, whereupon he devoted his life to Christian service and became an athlete of God and one of the soldier saints. However, in the United States, the first reported sighting of a dogman happened in 1887 when two lumberjacks in Wexford County, Michigan saw a dog-like creature that stood 7 feet tall. It had blue eyes, walked on two legs, and had the body of a man, but a terrifying howl like a human scream. In 1937 in Paris, Michigan, a man named Robert Fortney was attacked by 5 wild dogs, one of which he claimed to have walked on 2 legs. Similar reports of these creatures came from Allegan County in the 1950s and from Manistee and Cross Village in 1967. According to legends, the Michigan Dogman appears every 10 years, with sightings happening in years that end with certain numbers. People have reported seeing this creature in various parts of Michigan, mainly in the northwestern part of the Lower Peninsula. In her book, The Beast of Bray Road, Linda S. Godfrey talks about the sighting of a creature in Manistee and connects them to a similar creature spotted in Wisconsin called the Beast of Bray Road. This creature got its name from the rural farm road where it was seen in the 1980s and 90s. A local newspaper, the Walworth County Week, sent reporter Linda Godfrey to cover the story. At first, she was skeptical, but she later became convinced that many of the witnesses were sincere. Some people claimed the beast scratched their vehicles, leaving long marks on the doors and trunks. One person even said she hit something on Bray Road, and when she got out to check, a large wolf-like creature with red eyes chased her back to her car, leaving claw marks on the door. There were sightings during the day too, with witnesses describing a large wolf-like creature running on all fours through cornfields, sometimes chasing deer. In the area around Bray Road, there were reports of animals being partially eaten, with specific organs removed from their carcasses. One witness saw a large wolf-like creature eating an animal hit by a car on the side of the road, and it ran into the woods as the person approached. In 1987, a disc jockey named Steve Cook recorded a song about the legend of the Michigan Dogman as an April Fool's Day joke. However, soon thereafter, he started receiving calls from listeners who claimed to have encountered a similar creature. The song became very popular, and Cook donated proceeds from it to an animal shelter. Over the years, he received more than 100 reports about the creature. But are the dogmen the same as werewolves? Cryptozoologists say no. Dogmen are different creatures. They don't shapeshift like werewolves. They are always in the human canine form. Dogmen don't have advanced healing abilities of the werewolves, and they aren't vulnerable to silver. They're generally around 6 feet tall, while werewolves are much stronger. Dogmen have shaggy brown fur, unlike werewolves, who usually have silver or black fur. Dogmen have canine-like vision, and they're more slender compared to the hulking werewolves. Also, people can become werewolves if bitten, but there's no such curse with dogmen. Dogmen can be found in various parts of the United States and Canada, especially in farm areas near forests. They prefer temperate regions with access to water and prey like deer, cattle, sheep, and goats. During the winter, they may stay close to farms for easier hunting. While they tend to avoid humans and would rather flee than fight, they are vulnerable to bullets, poison, and other methods used to control wild canines. Dogmen have strong tracking abilities, even better than bloodhounds, thanks to their large snouts. They are more intelligent than dogs, but not as smart as humans. They can think ahead when hunting, although they often give in to their instincts. They usually hunt alone, but may team up opportunistically. If threatened, they tend to run away and are not typically aggressive towards humans. Some researchers speculate that dogmen may have a connection to ancient Native American mounds and consider the sightings in relation to these ancient sites. Skeptics claim most sightings can be attributed to a number of misidentified animals. Theories have been proposed, including that the creature is simply a gray wolf or a large dog, such as the Great Pyrenees or Newfoundland. It is also possible that hoaxes and mass hysteria have caused some falsehoods and sightings of normal creatures to be artificially placed under the same label. Others have theorized that the creature may be an American black bear suffering from mange. What are your thoughts about Dogman? Have you ever seen one? Let us know in the comments below. Spiritualism is the belief that the world is made up of at least two fundamental substances, matter and spirit. This is developed further by the inclusion of one's soul, the afterlife, spirits of the dead, deities, and mediums, as well as details about the nature of the relationship between spirit and matter. It is also a term commonly used for various psychic or paranormal practices and beliefs recorded throughout humanity's history in a variety of cultures. In spiritualism, the psychic is the connecting link between these worlds and is defined as someone endowed with exceptional sensitivity to the unseen realm, who experiences visions and revelations. One of the greatest spiritualism movements of the 19th century in America began in the bedroom of the Fox sisters, who were living in a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York, when they began communicating with an entity known as Mr. Splitfoot. But who were the Fox sisters? What type of phenomenon did they experience? Or were they just frauds? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
In March of 1848, Maggie Fox, 14, and Kate, her 11-year-old sister, began to share a frightening phenomenon with a nearby neighbor. Every night around bedtime, they heard a series of raps on the walls and furniture, raps that seemed to manifest with a peculiar otherworldly intelligence. The girls addressed the spirit as Mr. Splitfoot, which is a nickname for the devil. The neighbor, skeptical, came to see for herself, joining the girls in the small room they shared with their parents. While Maggie and Kate huddled together on their bed, their mother Margaret began the demonstration. "Now count to 5, she ordered, and the room shook with the sound of heavy thuds. "Count 15, she commanded, and the mysterious presence obeyed. Next she asked to tell the neighbor's age. 33 distinct raps followed. "If you are an injured spirit," she continued, "manifest it by 3 raps." And it did. Shortly thereafter, the Fox family left their home and sent Maggie and Kate to live with their older sister, Lee Fox Fish, in Rochester. The story might have faded away if not for Rochester being a hub of reform and religious activity. This area of the Finger Lakes region of New York State also gave rise to Mormonism and Millerism, which later evolved into Seventh-day Adventism. Local community leaders Isaac and Amy Post were intrigued by the Fox sisters' story, and by the subsequent rumor that the spirit likely belonged to a peddler, Charles Rosma, who had been murdered in the farmhouse 5 years beforehand. A group of Rochester residents examined the cellar of the Fox home, uncovering strands of hair and what appeared to be bone fragments. The Post then invited the girls to a gathering at their home, eager to see if they could communicate with the spirits in a different location. "I suppose I went with as much unbelief as Thomas felt when he saw Jesus after he had ascended," Isaac Post wrote. But he was convinced by very distinct thumps under the floor and several apparent answers. His belief was further strengthened when Lee Fox also demonstrated her ability as a medium by communicating with the Post's recently deceased daughter. The Post then rented a larger hall in Rochester, attracting 400 people to hear the mysterious noises. Afterwards, Amy Post accompanied the sisters to a private room where they disrobed and were examined by a committee of skeptics who found no evidence of a hoax. The idea that one could communicate with the spirits is not new. The Bible contains many references about mediums and speaking to the dead. However, the movement known as modern spiritualism sprang from several distinct revolutionary philosophies and characters. The ideas and practices of Franz Anton Mesmer, the 18th century Australian healer, had spread to the United States and by the 1840s held the country in a thrall. Mesmer proposed that everything in the universe, including the human body, was governed by magnetic fluid that could become imbalanced, causing illness. By waving his hands over a patient's body, he induced a mesmerized hypnotic state that allowed him to manipulate the magnetic force and restore health. Amateur mesmerists became a popular attraction at parties, a few proving skillful enough to attract paying customers. Some who awakened from a mesmeric trance claimed to have experienced visions of spirits from another dimension. At the same time, the ideas of Emanuel Swedenborg, an 18th century Swedish philosopher and mystic, also surged in popularity. Swedenborg described an afterlife consisting of 3 heavens, 3 hells, and an interim destination, the world of the spirits, where everyone went immediately upon dying, and which was more or less similar to what they were accustomed to on earth. Self-love drove one towards varying degrees of hell. Love for others elevated one to the heavens. The Lord cast no one into hell, he wrote, but those who are there have deliberately cast themselves into it and keep themselves there. He claimed to have seen and talked with spirits on all of the planes. 75 years later, the 19th century American seer, Andrew Jackson Davis, would become known as John the Baptist of modern spiritualism. Combining these two ideologies, claiming that Swedenborg's spirit spoke to him during a series of mesmeric trances, Davis recorded the content of these messages and in 1847 published them in The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind. It is truth, he asserted, predicting the rise of spiritualism. The spirits commune with one another while one is in the body and the other in the higher spheres. All the world will hail with delight the ushering in of that era when the interiors of men will be opened and the spiritual communication will be established. Davis believed his prediction materialized a year later on the very day the Fox sisters first channeled spirits in their bedroom. About daylight this morning, he confided in his diary, a warm breath passed over my face, and I heard a voice, tender and strong, saying, "Brother, the good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born." Upon learning of the Rochester incident, Davis invited the Fox sisters to his home in New York City to witness their medium capabilities firsthand. Aligning himself with the Fox sisters elevated his status from an obscure prophet to a recognized leader of a mass movement. This movement resonated with many Americans who were inclined to reject the bleak Calvinistic doctrine of predestination in favor of a reform-minded optimism of the 19th century. Americans who embraced spiritualism believed that direct communication with the deceased provided insight into the ultimate faith of their own souls. Maggie, Kate, and Lee Fox would later embark on a tour to spread the word of spirits, booking a suite, fittingly, at Barnum's Hotel on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane, an establishment owned by the cousin of the famed showman P.T. Barnum. An editorial in the Scientific American scoffed at their arrival, calling the girls spiritual knockers from Rochester. The Fox sisters conducted their sessions in the hotel's parlor, inviting as many as 30 attendees to gather around a large table at the hours of 10 a.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m., taking an occasional private meeting in between. Admission was $1, and visitors included preeminent members of New York society: Horace Greeley, the influential editor of the New York Tribune; James Fenimore Cooper, editor and poet; and abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, who witnessed a session in which the spirits rapped in time to a popular song and spelled out a message: "Spiritualism will work miracles in the cause of reform." Lee stayed in New York, entertaining callers in the seance room, while Kate and Maggie took to shows in other cities, among them Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia, where one visitor, explorer Elisha Kent Kane, succumbed to Maggie's charms, even as he deemed her a fraud, although he couldn't prove how the sounds were made. "After a whole month's trial, I could make nothing of them," he confessed. Therefore, they are a great mystery. He courted Maggie, 13 years his junior, and encouraged her to give up the life of jury sameness and suspected deceit. She acquiesced, retiring to attend school at Kane's behest and expense, and married him shortly before his untimely death in 1857. In mourning, she began drinking heavily and vowed to keep her promise to Kane, to wholly and forever abandon spiritualism. Kate meanwhile married a devout spiritualist and continued to develop her medium powers, translating spirit messages in astonishing and unprecedented ways, communicating two messages simultaneously, writing one while speaking the other, transcribing messages in reverse script, utilizing blank cards upon which words seem to spontaneously appear. During sessions with a wealthy banker, Charles Livermore, she summoned both the man's deceased wife and the ghost of Benjamin Franklin, who announced his identity by writing his name on a card. Her business boomed during and after the Civil War, as increasing numbers of the mourning found peace in spiritualism. Prominent spiritualist Emma Hardinge wrote that the war attributed to 2 billion new believers to the movement, and by the 1880s, there were an estimated 8 million spiritualists in the United States and Europe. On October 21, 1888, the New York World published an interview with Maggie Fox, in anticipation of her appearance that evening at the New York Academy of Music, where she would publicly denounce spiritualism. She was paid $1,500 for the exclusive. Her main motivation, however, was rage at her sister Lee and other leading spiritualists who had publicly chastised Kate for her drinking and accused her of being unable to care for her 2 young children. Kate planned to be in the audience when Maggie gave her speech, lending her tacit support. My sister Katie and myself were very young children when this horrible deception began, Maggie said. At night, when we went to bed, we used to tie an apple on a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor. Or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. A great many people, when they heard the rappings, imagined at once that the spirits are touching them, she explained. It's a very common delusion. Some very wealthy people came to see me some years ago when I lived in 42nd Street, and I did some rappings for them. I made the spirit rap on the chair, and one of the ladies cried out, "I feel the spirit tapping me on the shoulder." Of course, that was pure imagination. She offered a demonstration, removing her shoe and placing her right foot upon a wooden stool. The room fell silent and still, and was rewarded with a number of short little raps. There stood a black-robed, sharp-faced widow, the New York Herald reported, working her big toe and solemnly declaring that it was in this way she created the excitement that has driven so many persons to suicide or insanity. One moment it was ludicrous, the next it was weird. Maggie insisted that her sister Lee knew that the rappings were fake all along and greedily exploited her younger sisters. Before exiting the stage, she thanked God that she was able to expose spiritualism. The mainstream press called the incident a death blow to the movement, and spiritualists quickly took sides. Shortly after Maggie's confession, the spirit of Samuel B. Britton, a former publisher of the Spiritual Telegraph, appeared during a seance to offer a sympathetic opinion. Although Maggie was an authentic medium, he acknowledged, the band of spirits attending during the early part of her career had been usurped by other unseen intelligence who are not scrupulous in their dealings with humanity. Other living spiritualists charged that Maggie's change of heart was wholly mercenary. Since she had failed to make a living as a medium, she sought to profit by becoming one of spiritualism's fiercest critics. Regardless of her motive, Maggie retracted her confession a year later, claiming that her spirit guides had urged her to do so. This reversal incited further disdain from devoted spiritualists, many of whom didn't recognize her during a subsequent debate at the Manhattan Liberal Club. There, under the alias of Mrs. Spencer, Maggie exposed several tricks of the trade, including how mediums wrote messages on blank slates using their teeth or feet. She never reconciled with her sister Lee, who passed away in 1890. Kate died 2 years later during a drinking spree. Maggie died 8 months afterward in March of 1893. Ironically, that same year,
spiritualists established the National Spiritualist Association, now known as the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. So were the Fox sisters frauds, or could they really communicate with the dead? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Help! Help me! Help!
In Philippine folklore, Aswang is the term for different evil creatures like vampires, ghouls, witches, and werewolves. These mythological creatures are feared in the Philippines, and the stories of the Aswang date all the way back to the 16th century. The Aswang lore is well known in the southern parts of Luzon, Mindanao, but most particularly in the province of Capiz de Visayas. The names of the creatures may vary, like the Siligan in the island of Catanduanes, told to tear his victim's liver out and eat it. There is also the Mananagal, a woman with huge bat wings that could separate her upper body and lower body from the waist so that it could fly and eat people during the night, while in the morning she disguises herself as a beautiful lady. Sounds like my kind of woman. But the Aswang itself is a vampire-like creature who could suck the blood of its victim through a proboscis-like tongue. Sometimes it is said that the Aswang uses its proboscis-like tongue to suck the fetuses out of their mother's womb. After the conclusion of World War II, there was a huge spike of purported Aswang attacks, and there were even bodies piled on the streets as the proof. But why the sudden spike? Why were these demonic creatures going rampant? Were the Filipino people being punished? And what did the American CIA have to do with it? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran, filmmaker, history enthusiast, and investigator of the supernatural. And we will answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
This story starts at the conclusion of World War II and involves the Filipino insurgent group known as the Hukbalahap, or the Huks, led by their guerrilla leader named Louis Taruk. Taruk was born a peasant on June 21st in 1913. He would be imprisoned 3 times before the war in his struggle for the militant workers and the peasant unions. And he was a well-known hero to the Filipino people at the time and was instrumental in helping the Philippines gain its independence after World War II ended. The Huks were originally created at that time to fight the Japanese invaders and often fought side by side with U.S. forces until its liberation from the Japanese at the end of the war. At the height of its popularity, the Huks reached a fighting strength estimated at 30,000 guerrillas. Upon the conclusion of World War II, the Philippines was completely devastated, needing almost all of its infrastructure rebuilt, including its railways, waterworks, roads, bridges, and power plants. However, the Philippines had a vast amount of natural resources, like timber, oil, and minerals. But it lacked the capital and heavy industrial ability to get at them. Philippine law also forbade foreigners from owning any business operating in the islands, which all but cut off any hope of foreign investment. As a result, the Bell Trade Act was passed by Congress in 1946. It gave the Philippines $800 million in aid and a tariff-free trade between the U.S. and the Philippines for 12 years. But it required that the Philippine law allow United States citizens to own companies on the islands as a way to attract foreign investments into their economy. To the Huks, this looked as if the Philippines were once again surrendering their sovereignty to a foreign power as they did with Spain. They pictured U.S. citizens owning vast swaths of their economy, and they didn't like that at all. President Rojas wanted U.S. aid, so he kicked the Huks out of Congress. In turn, the World War II veteran Huks rebelled both against the Philippine government and the U.S. forces. When Rojas died in 1948 from a heart attack,
he was replaced by Elpidio Corino, whose administration was ineffective in fighting the Huks. And this is where our story gets interesting. The absence of a strong figure in Filipino national politics saw the CIA enter the scene to counter what was emerging as a communist revolution led by Louis Turok and the Democratic Alliance Party. The CIA knew that sometimes a search and destroy approach was not the best course of action in defeating your enemies. Psychological warfare was sometimes even more effective. And that's when the CIA brought in U.S. Air Force Colonel Edward Lansdale, who used his knowledge of Filipino culture and folklore to defeat the Filipino communist insurgents. I mean, what's worse, fighting off foreign troops in your country or having to fight off blood-sucking demons? And this is exactly the brilliant and gruesome play Lansdale made. Lansdale was a pioneer in clandestine operations and psychological warfare. He served with the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, and he extended his tour to remain in the Philippines after the war, helping the Philippine Army rebuild its intelligence services and resolve the cases of the large numbers of prisoners of war. Lansdale became friends with Ramon Magsaysay, then the Secretary of National Defense, and with his help, Magsaysay eventually became the President of the Philippines on December 30th, 1953. But going back to our story, from 1948 to 1954, he used Filipino folklore to stop the Huks, silently working in the background using the Aswang to stop the incoming communist tide. The CIA began abducting Huk members, killing them, and then they would pierce their necks and hang them upside down until their bodies were drained of all blood. Then the CIA placed the mangled bodies, with the holes in their necks, on the side of the road, usually in busy province areas. The superstitious Huk members were scared stiff, believing that it was the evil Aswang who had done in their comrades. Lansdale's plan worked like a charm. The residents of Luzon lived in fear of being the Aswang's next victim. The communists would often move from one location to another, trying to avoid these nightmarish creatures, but the bodies kept piling. The CIA knew the psychological operation was working, and eventually the Huks would surrender in 1954 and would receive a pardon from the Philippine government. Magically, after their surrender, the Aswang attacks immediately stopped. Dirty, but apparently effective. Let me know your thoughts on these CIA tactics.
A horrifying spectacle. Its existence shocks and fascinates the world of science. Its gigantic claws capable of crushing a man or tearing a woman apart as if she were a fly. But nothing sends the cats like the presence of out-of-this-world horror.
The spider. Hunters of insects, small reptiles, and even birds. But what if I told you that there were spiders big enough to hunt humans? Step into the mysterious world of the Jba Fofi, also recognized as the Congolese giant spiders. These colossal arachnid cryptids are whispered to roam the depths of Congo's forests, potentially unveiling a new and undiscovered species within the realm of arachnida. But is there any real evidence of their existence? And has anyone befallen to their treacherous webs? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
In the myriad of accounts, the spider's tactics unfold. They craft shallow tunnels beneath tree roots, shrouding them with a leafy facade. Their near-invisible webs connect these burrows to nearby trees, weaving a complex network of trip lines. Oblivious prey
unsuspecting, and destined for the creature's menu, unwittingly trigger these lines, signaling the spider to come. Once alerted, the chase ensues, culminating in the victim ensnared within the intricate web. This predatory behavior echoes the tactics observed in various species of trapdoor spiders, showcasing a cunning and strategic approach to hunting. According to the locals of Congo, the Jba Fofi eggs are described as pale yellow-white, resembling peanuts, while their hatchlings display a striking hue of bright yellow with a purple abdomen. As these creatures mature, their coloration gradually deepens into darker shades of brown. The indigenous communities residing in the Congo regions, where the Jba Fofi sightings occur, affirm that these spiders were once abundant but have since dwindled to a remarkably rare status. However, throughout recorded history, sightings of the Jba Fofi have been plentiful, and one of the first sightings from a Westerner was from an English missionary, Arthur John Symes, and Symes met an end more horrific than any other in the 1890s. Arthur Symes was trekking through the jungle near Lake Nyassa. He and his men had been warned about the spiders, but they paid the warnings no mind. Suddenly, his men got tangled in a thick web. While Arthur and the others tried extricating their comrades, a pair of massive spiders rushed out of the foliage. Some of the missionaries were killed, and Arthur himself was badly bitten, but he brandished his pistol and filled the spider full of lead. Symes managed to escape the encounter with what was left of his men. The spiders, who were clearly against converting to Christianity, retreated for a while before returning to consume the fallen missionaries. After much of a struggle, Symes finally made it to the nearby village. He was badly swollen around the bite wound, and a fever soon set in. Symes recorded the incident before he grew delirious with fever and slipped into a coma. He preached his last gospel and died in his bed. Another account is chronicled by George Ebhart in his seminal cryptozoological book. In his work, Ebhart recounts a harrowing incident involving an English couple, R.K. Lloyd and his wife, as they traveled the jungles of the Congo in 1938. Encountering a massive creature crossing their path, initially mistaken for a cat or a monkey, they soon realized it was a colossal spider, boasting legs spanning nearly 3 feet. Yet another tale comes from a renowned cryptozoologist, William J. Gibbons, known for his pursuit in the fabled Congolese dinosaur, the Mokele Membe, and was embarked on his third expedition in search of this legendary creature. During his quest, Gibbons encountered local natives who shared their vivid encounters with gigantic spiders. Upon returning to Canada, he passionately conveyed these indigenous experiences to his readers. Gibbons shared, "During my third expedition in Equatorial Africa, I seized the chance to inquire among the pygmy communities about knowledge regarding such colossal spiders, and to my surprise, they were well acquainted with the Jba Fofi, or the giant or great spider. Their vivid descriptions depicted these spiders as predominantly brown, with a distinctive purple marking on their abdomens. These creatures grow to an astonishing size, boasting a leg span of at least 5 feet. The formidable arachnids construct elaborate layers resembling traditional pygmy huts, woven together with leaves, and are known to spin robust circular webs between trees, often across game trails," Gibbons detailed. "They are formidable predators, preying upon smaller forest antelope, birds, and other small game, wielding both danger and a potent venom." He continued, "According to the pygmies, these spiders lay clusters of white, peanut-sized eggs. While the locals steer clear when encountering them, they have, in the past, eliminated these giants. Once abundant, these colossal spiders have now become a rarity in sightings." In March 2013, a video surfaced on YouTube of an alleged Jba Fofi caught on night vision camera near a foxhole next to a tree in Mozambique. The Jba Fofi appears out of the darkness for a brief moment while scurrying back into the darkness on the far right side of the screen. Many of the Mozambique locals describe the spiders as once being numerous, but now a vanishing species. Encroachment by civilization in the form of a rainforest being converted to houses and industrial centers. For those who have contended with the spider, the now rarity of these creatures is a blessing for them. Officially, the largest species of spider is the Goliath bird eater, with a leg span of up to 12 inches. As we conclude this exploration into the mysterious realm of the Jba Fofi, the Congolese giant spiders, their existence remains a captivating enigma. From ancient tales to modern encounters, these colossal arachnids continue to intrigue and bewilder both locals and explorers alike. Whether nestled in folklore of indigenous communities or recounted in the narratives of intrepid adventures, the Jba Fofi stands as a testament to the uncharted depths of our natural world. As we continue our quest for understanding, their story reminds us that amidst the familiar, the unknown still thrives, inviting us to delve deeper into the wonders that lie hidden within the jungles of our planet. So what are your thoughts of the Jba Fofi? Let us know in the comments below.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.